There is an old person in your family who knows something no one has ever thought to ask them, and when they die, it will go with them. Right now, in the world you live in, growing old is something most people quietly dread. For most of the time humans have existed, losing one old person could kill the whole group. It is not just the aches and the failing eyesight, but something deeper. The slow slide into the background. The retirement that ends your usefulness. The culture that worships youth and looks past the gray-haired person in the room. The nursing home at the edge of town where the old are gathered, cared for, and mostly forgotten. We have made old age safer and longer than at any point in human history, and somehow, at the same time, we have made it lonelier. To grow old, for many people today, is to feel yourself slowly becoming invisible. For almost the entire history of our species, it was the exact opposite. To grow old was not to fade, it was to rise into the single most powerful, most respected, most irreplaceable position a human being could hold. The old were not the forgotten people at the edge of the group. They were the center of it, and the survival of everyone else, quite literally, often depended on them. But before we get to why, we have to clear away a myth, because almost everyone believes something about ancient old age that is simply false. You have heard it 100 times. In the past, people died young. 30 was old. Nobody lived to see gray hair. It is one of the most repeated facts about the ancient world, and it is a statistical illusion. In 2007, the anthropologists Gurven and Hillard Kaplan compiled the most thorough study of hunter-gatherer lifespans ever assembled, drawing on real mortality records from foraging societies around the world. Yes, they found that life expectancy at birth hovered around 30 years. But that number is a trap, and here is why. Infant and child mortality in these societies was staggering. Infant death rates over 30 times higher than in a modern developed country. Early childhood death rates over 100 times higher. So many babies and small children died that they dragged the average down catastrophically. But average life expectancy is not the age people tended to die. It is a number distorted almost beyond meaning by all those tiny graves. Look instead at what happened to the people who survived childhood, and the picture transforms completely. Gurven and Kaplan found that the most common age of death for adults, the age people actually reached if they made it past the deadly early years, was somewhere between 68 and 78 years, not 30, roughly 70. They concluded that the natural human lifespan, the one our biology is actually built for, is around 7 decades, and that it was not at all uncommon for ancient people to reach it. Over a third of adult life in these societies was spent past the age of reproduction. So old people existed. Gray-haired, weathered, deeply experienced people were a real presence in ancient bands. Not many. Reaching 70 in a world of predators and infection and accident was an achievement. But they were there. And the question of how they survived turns out to be inseparable from the question of why the group wanted them to. Start with the most important thing an old person possessed in a world with no books, no writing, no way to store knowledge outside a human skull. The old person was the library. They were the only copy of information that could not be found anywhere else. And some of that information was the difference between life and death for the entire group. Consider a drought that strikes once every 40 years. A young adult has never seen one. They do not know which distant water source still holds water when the rivers fail, because the last time it happened, they had not been born. But the old woman by the fire remembers. She was a child the last time the world dried up like this, and she remembers where her own grandmother led the band to survive it. That memory, carried in one aging head, could save every person in the group. The rare catastrophe, the once-in-a-lifetime event, the danger that only recurs across generations, the only defense a pre-literate people had against it was a living person old enough to have survived it before. Lose that person before the knowledge passed on, and you lost the library in a single death. This is why, across countless traditional societies, the old were treated not as a burden to be endured, but as a resource to be protected. They held the map to the disasters no one else could see coming. And there is startling evidence that this role did not just help ancient humans survive. It may have powered the single greatest leap our species ever made. The anthropologists Caspari and Sang-Hee Lee set out to answer a simple question. When in human history did it become common to grow old? They analyzed more than 750 fossil teeth spanning 3 million years of human evolution, using wear patterns to sort individuals into the young and the genuinely old enough to be grandparents. What they found was a slow, steady rise in the proportion of older adults across the eons. And then, around 30,000 years ago, in the Upper Paleolithic, that number did not just rise. It exploded, a 4-fold to 5-fold increase in the number of people living long enough to become grandparents. For the first time in the history of our lineage, old people were not rare. There were more older adults than young ones, and here is what stops you. That explosion of grandparents happened at almost exactly the same moment as the greatest cultural leap in human history. The sudden flowering of sophisticated art, of cave paintings, of jewelry and body ornament and burial ritual, of complex tools and rapid population growth. The era we point to as the dawn of true behavioral modernity. Caspari and Lee argue this was not a coincidence. A society suddenly full of old people was a society suddenly full of libraries, accumulated knowledge, transmitted expertise, information built up across more generations than ever before and passed down through the living memory of elders. Older and wiser, as Caspari put it. The presence of the old may have been the very thing that let human culture ignite. We did not become modern and then start living longer. We started living longer, and it may be what made us modern, which raises the deepest question of all. Because human longevity is genuinely strange. Most animals die at or around the end of their reproductive lives. From a cold evolutionary standpoint, an animal that can no longer reproduce is, in the brutal logic of natural selection, finished. Its genes have been passed on, or they haven't. Yet humans are one of a tiny handful of species, alongside a few whales, that routinely live for decades past the ability to have children. Human women, like female great apes, stop reproducing in their 40s. Unlike any great ape, they then frequently go on living into their 70s. Why? Why would evolution build an animal that spends a third of its life unable to reproduce? The anthropologist Kristen Hawkes found an answer while watching old women dig for roots. Studying the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer people in Tanzania, she noticed that the hardest-working foragers in the whole community were often the postmenopausal grandmothers, tirelessly pulling up deep, tough tubers that young children could not extract for themselves. And she noticed a pattern in the data. A child's growth tracked its mother's foraging, until a new baby arrived and the mother's attention shifted. Then the child's well-being tracked its grandmother's work instead. The grandmother was the safety net. By feeding her weaned grandchildren, an old woman freed her daughter to have another baby sooner and kept the existing children alive and thriving. This is the grandmother hypothesis, and its implication is profound. It suggests that the long human lifespan is not a byproduct of modern comfort or a lucky accident. It is an adaptation. We may live long specifically because, across evolutionary time, the presence of the old, provisioning, protecting, remembering, measurably increased how many of their descendants survived. Old age, in this view, is not something humans reluctantly endured. It is something we evolved on purpose because the old kept the young alive. And the caring went both ways. In 1908, in a cave at La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a Neanderthal man who came to be known simply as the Old Man. He had lived into his 60s or beyond, and by the end, his body had fallen apart. He had lost nearly all of his teeth, the empty sockets long since healed over, meaning he had survived toothless for years. A man with no teeth cannot chew the tough raw food that keeps a body alive. Someone had to help him, softening food, perhaps preparing it especially for him, keeping him fed and sheltered long after he could no longer do it himself. Some of the details of his condition have been debated over the decades, but the core fact of the toothless, healed jaw is not seriously disputed, and it tells a clear story. In a Neanderthal group tens of thousands of years ago, a frail old man was not abandoned. He was carried. His people chose to spend their own scarce resources keeping him alive. But honesty demands the harder truth as well. because it was not always so gentle. Old age was the most exalted position in the ancient world, but it could also be the most precarious, and which one you got depended on whether you were still needed and whether the group could afford you. In the most marginal environments, among peoples living on the very edge of survival, there is ethnographic evidence that the very old were sometimes left behind when a band had to move and a frail elder could not keep up, or when there was simply not enough food to feed someone who could no longer contribute. These were not acts of cruelty so much as agonizing decisions forced by conditions that left no margin at all. The exalted elder and the abandoned elder were two faces of the same hard reality. Your knowledge, your relationships, your usefulness were what bought your place by the fire. As long as you held the library, you were irreplaceable. When the body failed completely and the knowledge had already been passed on, an old person in a starving band could find themselves in the most vulnerable position of their entire life. Which brings us back to where we started, and to the strange inversion at the center of all this. We have solved the precariousness. No modern elder is left behind on a trail because the group cannot carry them. We have made old age safe, medicalized, comfortable, and long in a way no ancient human could have dreamed of. But in doing so, we accidentally dismantled the very thing that once made old age powerful. The elder was irreplaceable because they were the only library. And then we invented writing and printing, and finally we put the entire accumulated knowledge of the species into a device in everyone's pocket. The drought from 40 years ago is in a database now. The rare knowledge that only an old person could hold is a search away. We freed ourselves from needing the old, and in freeing ourselves, we quietly stripped them of the role that made them the center of every human group for hundreds of thousands of years. Ancient humans survived old age because the group could not survive without them. That was the whole arrangement. The old kept everyone alive, and so everyone kept the old alive in return. We broke that bargain. We gained the knowledge and lost the reason to gather around the person who held it. And that, more than any ache or any gray hair, may be what you are quietly dreading.